Welcome to the Living a Nordic Life podcast, where we explore a simpler, cosier and more intentional life the Nordic way. I'm Fiona McKenna, your Nordic living guide and founder of Living a Nordic Life, where I share all things Nordic living and show you that a Nordic life is the way to bring intentional calm and healthy habits into your own life, wherever you are in the world. Are you looking for ways to bring simplicity, coziness and calm into your life? Well, let me show you how. Visit the Living a Nordic Life website to explore how I can help you on your journey to simple, healthy and happy calm, the Nordic way. You can subscribe to the podcast right here. And if you want regular inspirational emails sent with love from Norway and straight to your inbox, don't forget to subscribe to the Living a Nordic Life newsletters. And so now let's dive into our episode. Hello and welcome to Den Utedo. It sounds a bit mysterious, doesn't it? And like it might be an event that you'd want to go to. But the utedo is in fact the famous Norwegian outside toilet. And I want to talk to you about this because it's an important part of Norwegian and Nordic cultural history, actually. And I'm going to be serious, or as serious as I possibly can be with this, because this kind of appeals to my British sense of toilet humour. But these are a very serious thing. Throughout Norway, you'll find these cute little wooden buildings dotted around in the most convenient places for everyone to use. They're usually in places where running water and a sewage system are both hard to find. Like at a lake, for example, that's only accessible on foot, or a remote beach, or even at the top of a mountain, I kid you not. But they are always composting toilets with no water added, just a hole in the ground that's moved after a few years to a new location. And the utedo can vary from an almost luxurious affair with new tiled floor and ultra-modern toilet, a bit like one that we have at a lake not far from us, where there's some running water, but there's no sewage system. And it's a free live centre, which is an outdoor centre. It's free for everybody to use, and it's very popular. And they built these new outside toilets, and it looks very traditional from the outside, but when you go in, it's lovely. It's white tiled floors and white painted walls and ceilings and a really lovely looking state-of-the-art proper toilet. But when you lift the lid, obviously it's a composting toilet and there's no flush because we don't put water down composting toilets. But they can be something like that, but they can also be something with a very simple dirt floor, wooden walls and a wooden seat. And that's very much like something that we visited. We didn't visit the toilet. We visited this island at the weekend, just gone. And it's very difficult to get anything onto the island. It has to be brought in by ferry or small boats. But there was an area where people can camp and be there overnight. And of course, there was a composting toilet because we don't want to put mess and rubbish into pristine nature. It has to be all kept in one place. But it reminded me a little bit of the Wild West, actually, because when you opened the door of this composting toilet, it was a very traditional building. When you opened the door of this composting toilet, the door held shut with like a hook on the inside. But the toilet seat itself, or the toilet itself, was just a square box with a hole cut in the middle over the composting bit. And that's how basic they can be. But there is one thing that they all share, and that is the smell. I'm sorry to say, especially in the summer. But if you're out in the fresh air and hopefully there's a breeze, it hardly seems to matter. Usually, they're made out of wood. And the door of the utedo generally has a heart shape punched out of it. So if you're ever in desperate need of one and you're not sure whether you are looking at an utedo or somebody's adorable little cabin or little shed that they're keeping stuff in, you don't need to worry. The heart shape on the door will give it away. The history of the utedo is long and fairly illustrious. Archaeological excavations in Norway have found utedo dating back from medieval times. It's amazing, isn't it? Often they were a very simple affair, but there were those with a proper wooden seat with a hole in, much more comfortable than the more basic types that were just a pole over a hole in the ground. I wouldn't want to use that in the winter. By the 19th century, though, the utedo we are much more familiar with. In a building became the norm across the whole of Norway. But in some parts of the north of the country, it was still seen as an unnecessary luxury. I wonder if it was an unnecessary luxury because of the materials used or the time spent, or maybe people spent too much time in it. Who knows? But I'm not sure I would want to use a pole over a hole in the ground in the middle of winter in the north of Norway. We do get rather a lot of snow. Of course, the question of waste disposal was one that was always at the foremost, and this is like many parts of Europe or many European cities as we got into the 19th century, because they were increasing so quickly and our population was increasing so fast that waste disposal really was something that was hugely important, because otherwise people were picking up some pretty nasty diseases from things, and it was smelly and it was horrible and just generally unpleasant. So a lot of energy was put into waste disposal systems, which I might add are the same ones that we still use today. In London, the sewage system is the Victorian sewage system, so it's more than a couple of 100 years old, and it's still maintained and used as it is. In many parts of Europe, the utedo was often placed over a stream, river, or the quayside, straight into the sea. But this also provided important work in the matter of emptying, especially in the towns and cities where maybe there wasn't a river. This kind of work was not the most fragrant kind, as you can imagine, and so it was done at night, so as not to disturb the population too much. How thoughtful is that? Hence the name for the person who emptied the utedo in Norway was nattmann, nightman. In the 1900s, the utedo was pretty much the only sort of toilet that you would find in Oslo. There were only 18 indoor toilets in the whole city. Can you imagine if you were the person who had an indoor toilet? You probably thought you were pretty special. I bet quite a few of those were in the royal palace, actually. We can still find them even now, but of a much more advanced type than you would have encountered in the 1900s. Phew, that's a relief, isn't it? So if you're visiting Oslo, don't worry, you don't have to look for a wooden utedo. You could go into a normal toilet. But it's funny, isn't it, that in a country of so much wealth, something like an utedo might seem an odd thing to find. There's a lot of focus here on green energy, electric cars, for example. We have more electric cars per capita than any other country in the world. But in rural areas, they're still fairly common. With the right construction and system, they rarely need emptying. They only need emptying and moving probably once every few years if it's a very busy one, if it's one that you have at your cabin, which most cabins do have them, I have to say. There aren't that many that have indoor toilets and running water. Most of them are very traditional because they're very remote, and it's much easier to have a system like this. But with the right construction, they rarely need emptying, and many cabins still have this simple utedo, like I said, with a traditional heart shape on the door. So next time you're in Norway, in the middle of nowhere, and bizarrely, there's a cute little cabin with a heart on the door, you will know that you are in the presence of a piece of Norwegian cultural history. And now you know a little bit about it. And it's something that endures even in modern times and has saved many a desperate soul, me included. So I hope you've enjoyed this very short and fun little trip into Norwegian cultural history. Den utedo. And I will see you in the next episode. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the Living a Nordic Life newsletters so you can get an email when I release a new episode. It's a quick and easy way to keep up with all things Nordic living. Please visit livinganordiclife.com. You can listen to Living a Nordic Life on lots of podcast apps, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, and plenty of others. If you've enjoyed the Living a Nordic Life podcast, why not leave me a rating? So that's the end of Living a Nordic Life for today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.